Hi, this is Carrie with Carrie Concealed in the Active Self-Protection Extra channel, and today I thought we would talk a little bit about what it's like and the different things that expert witnesses in use of force are called upon to do.
Palm pepper spray is next generation OC spray. It's hot at 1.4% major capsaicinoids, and its modular design means you can customize it exactly to you. 3 different setups, lots of different color combinations. You can make it exactly as you like. And the flip top safety prevents accidental discharges. It's 10 to 12 foot range and 25 half-second blasts. Make sure that you can keep that long range eye poke at long range. I trust Palm OC and I recommend it for everyone for self-defense.
Well, over the past several years now, I've had some opportunities to do work in the expert witness arena, and there isn't a ton of information, to be honest. At least not that I've found when I first started doing this, at least in this space. There's lots of expert witnesses in lots of other domains, but specifically in use of force and firearms and things like that, I just don't know a lot of people that do it. Of course, Mr. Masada Ayub does it, Mr. John does it, and there are some others as well. But it isn't something that it's easy just to go out and buy a book about it and learn about it. So it's kind of been a learn as you go, and I've had some wonderful people mentor me along the way, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But one of the things I thought I'd mention to begin with is I'd like to read you a quote from an attorney. Her name was Lisa Steele, and she said, A self-defense case is fundamentally different from many other criminal prosecutions. The essence of the defense is that the defendant is the victim of an attempted or completed violent felony such as assault, rape, or homicide, which, but for the defendant's lawful actions, would have resulted in the defendant's death or in serious bodily harm. The complainant is, in fact, a violent aggressor who, but for the defendant's lawful action, would be the one standing trial. So it's tried very differently because it's an affirmative defense. The individual is saying, yes, I did use lethal force, but I was justified in doing so. And that calls for a different approach. So one of the roles of an expert witness is just helping the defense understand, and it could be prosecution as well, but understand what is a valid use of force claim and what are the standards of use of force. And so educating people really is one of the primary roles of this. Sometimes it's even educating clients. I've had cases where attorneys have called and asked if I would evaluate a case. And thankfully, I get to evaluate a case, and I'm paid to evaluate a case, the discovery for that case, review it, and determine whether or not in my, based on my knowledge, training, experience, and education, whether or not it meets the standards of use of force. And if it does meet the standards, then I let the people that hired me know. If it does not meet the standards, I also let them know. And sometimes my job is to tell the client why, in my opinion, and tell the attorney why, in my opinion, it is not a justified use of force, or it does not fall within the standards of use of force. I don't use the term justified use of force. I do stick with it. It's either inside the standards or outside the standards of use of force. So explaining the use of force standards, educating people on them, those are some of the roles of expert witnesses. Another thing is also making what's implicit explicit. So something that's implicit would be tacit knowledge, which is things that are implied or understood without being stated. And one of the things that can be a real challenge for expert witnesses, and whether they're involved in officer-involved shootings or it's civilian shootings, is helping the individual that was involved articulate what it is that they were seeing that let them know that it was a use of force or deadly force situation. So why is that so hard to do? Well, it's not something that we have a lot of practice at doing. And even Force Science explains that even police officers aren't necessarily great at being able to explain that. It often takes part of the investigation to draw that out. What were you seeing? What were the significant cues you saw, and what did those mean to you? How did you make sense of them? What were you perceiving that they meant? How did they impact your risk assessment? Those sorts of things. because the judicial system is set up on the reasonableness of an individual's actions. And how do you explain the reasonableness of their actions? Well, someone has to articulate what it is that they were perceiving and in the moment, within the totality of the circumstances. So another role of expert witnesses is to write written reports. And so here is my doozy that I just submitted. 140 pages of it. 20 pages of that's my CV, but it's a thick thing. There's 6 pages of references. That's one thing that I think I've done a little differently than some of the reports I've seen. I tried, just like I try to never ask my students to believe me about anything, I want to give them information so that they can discover things on their own. I want to be able to guide them to what they're trying to find out. But I don't expect people to believe me. It's the same with this. There's so much information written about use of force that in the standards for it, that it doesn't have to be just what Carrie says. It's here's all of these people that for, well, if you go all the way back to Warren on Homicide, for over 100 years who have been talking about these principles and what they mean and how they apply and that sort of thing. So I have 6 pages of references, which is a lot. I think for a report like this, lots of quotes. There's 34 figures, and I was going to show you one figure that I like a lot, and it's this figure right here. And that is just showing a disparity of size or strength between two people. That's, if you can't tell, that's Simone Biles, a 7-time Olympic medalist, and NBA retired, I think, NBA center Shaquille O'Neal, and just showing both of them are amazing athletes. But if Miss Biles had to protect herself against someone Mr. O'Neal's size, she would be at a huge disadvantage in doing that. What else do we have here? Oh, another thing that expert witnesses may be tasked to do is to help with trial strategy and trial planning, and talking about demonstrative evidence. What can the attorney do during the trial that will help the triers of fact, whether that's the judge or whether it's a bench trial or a jury trial? It could be just a judge or it could be a jury. And demonstrative evidence is something that you don't have to hear or believe testimony to be able to make a determination. You can look at it and see the evidence and understand it. And that's particularly helpful, especially when it's complex topics that are difficult to understand. So anyway, sometimes that's what experts do, trial planning and strategy. Another thing they might do is helping the defense counsel understand how human factors play a role. For example, shots to the back. How can an attacker, or how can a defender have shot an attacker in the back or past the midline, and how can that still fall within the use of force standards? Those are things that expert witnesses are often called upon to explain to defense counsel, and then sometimes even to the triers of fact. Sometimes just explaining how a firearm even works when the client is explaining that they, took the firearm out of the holster and they, took the safety off, racked the slide, put the safety back on, or they held it at a low ready. The attorney might not be familiar with those terms or what those things mean. And so I found it really helpful to offer to take the attorneys, for certain cases, to the range, and I will borrow or sometimes buy, depends on the price of it, a firearm identical to the one used in the case, so that the attorney has a chance to actually see what it's like, and maybe some of the sounds that it may have made, and just kind of get a feel for it, especially if they don't come from a background where they have that experience. So I talked about explaining how gun was. Oh, another thing, in one case I had was sifting through the use of force policies for the entire state, actually not even just my state, but also bordering states and federal use of force policies, and the words and the terminology used in those use of force policies. What are they for law enforcement, and are they the same use of force standards as apply to private citizens? And then explaining, yes, they are, or no, they aren't. Here's how they are, or here's how they aren't. Those kinds of things can end up being helpful. Let's see, what else do I have here? I think that was about it. Oh, I was going to mention some of the sections of a report that an expert witness might end up working on. This is a report that I did for the Advanced Force Science course that we did, and some of the figures, an example of a figure would be this here, maybe taking some screen captures and showing the report reader, here's why something may have been seen or not seen from the camera's view based on the number of people around the person. One thing I really like to do in my reports is put together a timeline of what happened, and I actually include that in the report. I find that's super helpful, not just for me, but also for the triers of fact as well. So I just take facts and evidence and I make a timeline like this and just explain, all right, at this time, here's what was going on. Here's where this person was. Here's where that person was. Those sorts of things can help out. Another big part of expert witness work can be writing the preamble of a report. The report I just turned in the preamble, it talked about a number of different topics. Things like that firearms are normal and normal people own firearms, and self-defense isn't common sense. Why isn't self-defense common sense? Why do we think it is, and how do we know that it isn't? And then things like unarmed doesn't mean undangerous, and the defensive display of a firearm to deter an expected attack and how that impacts, or what the factors involved in that are. The case that I just finished up had a number of disparity of force factors, more than I've seen in any case. And so the bulk of this report was detailing those different factors of disparity and why they were so key in this case and how they affected this case and the perceptions of the defender and the actions that the defender took. Another thing that sometimes I do as an expert witness is I make Lego displays. This probably seems a little weird, but sometimes I have a hard time understanding the exact size of a room and where things were. And so I found Legos to be very helpful. I do not use these in court. I don't show these in court. I do sometimes show them to the attorneys to help them get a visual of where the spent casing was found, or where different things were, or how big a window was and things like that, or things that were on the floor in the room, that sort of thing. So sometimes making a Lego display, it helps to have a son who has a Lego business. Otherwise, I'm not sure what I would do, but that has helped me, especially on cases where there's staircases involved or garages with multiple doors. It can just be really, really confusing. Another thing I did also for one of the cases I had was just understanding the history of a particular firearm that the defender used. And I don't know about you, but there's a series of books put out by Time Life I think it was in the early 1970s. And when I was a kid, my mom got this series. One came every month for like maybe a year or two. And I got it from my dad for Christmas one year. And my favorite one was the book, this one, The Gunfighters. And I used to read it before bed often, sometimes after school. But just to be able to research the history of the firearm that was used by the individual in the particular case. Here's one thing expert witnesses don't do. I remembered this just as I was flipping through this a couple of days ago. This is a story about Temple Houston, who was Sam Houston, the famous Sam Houston. It was his son. And Temple Houston was known as a crack marksman who once beat Bat Masterson in a pistol match. But apparently, Temple Houston was an attorney, and he did a lot of criminal defense cases. And he would wow people with his oratory skills. The book explains that in another trial, Houston whipped out a pair of Colt 45s, pointed them at the jury box, and blazed away, neglecting to inform the jurors that the guns were loaded with blanks. He was trying to prove that his client, who was charged with the murder of a skilled gunfighter, had acted in self-defense by shooting first. I only wanted to show what speed the dead man possessed, Houston said in apologizing to the court. However, the ploy misfired, and the defendant was found guilty. That's not anything an expert witness does. We don't do things like that, thank goodness. But we've seen defense attorneys in national trials who have pointed AR rifles at the jury. So at least they're not shooting blanks at them. But anyway, so there's a number of different things that that expert witnesses do to whether, and oftentimes it doesn't even end up going to trial. Sometimes the report itself will take care of things. Sometimes a plea deal is made. It could be a number of different things. One of the things I've had to do a number of different times is now explain to the client why the facts of the case, as they are in discovery, in my opinion, do not meet the standards of use of force. And so I came up with this little, and a friend of mine is the one that encouraged me to consider putting the use of force standards in a flow chart. And so I did that, and I will we'll put a copy of this in the description for you if you want to print this out. But it has the different standards across the top, and so hopefully this will make it unemotional to be able to evaluate a case. But the first standard it looks at is imminence. Was the threat imminent? And so ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. And then you just look and answer the questions in each block, and if the answer is yes, you just progress on. Once that claim, the claim of, or the imminence link is solid, then you can move on to the next link, which is who's the aggressor. And then from there you go on to, and it's kind of self-explanatory, but it goes through, is a retreat possible? And was there actually a deadly threat? And then what about reasonableness, objective and subjective reasonableness? So anyway, we'll put a link to this in the description below, and maybe this will help you. But this was really helpful to me. The reason I came up with, or found it necessary to come up with this, is I had, the very first time I had to go tell a client that, based on my knowledge, training, experience, the facts of the case, it did not meet the use of force standards. I remember he was on one side of the plexiglass and I was on the other. He was incarcerated at the time, and I had to explain to this man, who genuinely believed that he had justifiably used force, I had to somehow help him understand how it wasn't. And I didn't want to try to convince him of anything. I wanted him to be able to see it for himself. So coming up with something like this, that I wish I would have had it when I met with him, because I didn't have anything I could leave with him. When I explained the standards of use of force to him, he listened very carefully, and then he said, "Can you write that down for me? I don't want to forget that." And anyway, it was just sobering for me to realize that there are so many that don't understand what the standards of use of force are, especially use of lethal force. So anyway, maybe this will help you a way to at least evaluate uses of force that you hear about or read about, or maybe a way to explain it to other individuals. So that's about it. That's about all I have for today. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.